The morning sun peeked through the blinds as Eleanor Reeves zipped her small carry-on shut. At 63, she moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had spent decades in military service. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, still sharp as ever, glanced at the clock. 3 hours until her flight. Perfect. Eleanor wasn't much for rushing these days. After 30 years as an Air Force flight surgeon, retirement had finally taught her to slow down. Almost. Old habits died hard, and punctuality was practically written into her DNA. "You've got everything?" Her husband Tom called from the kitchen. "Passport, ticket, phone, charger, and something to read," Eleanor replied, mentally checking her list. "I'm all set." Tom appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. "Wish I could come with you." "Someone has to feed the cat," Eleanor smiled, touching his arm gently. "Besides, it's just a quick trip. 4 days to see Lily graduate, and I'll be back before you know it." Their granddaughter's college graduation wasn't something Eleanor wanted to miss, even if it meant flying commercial, something she'd gotten used to avoiding during her years of military transport. The ride to the airport was quiet. Eleanor watched the familiar neighborhood slip by, thinking about Lily in her cap and gown. The first grandchild to finish college. How time flew. At the airport, Eleanor moved through security with practiced ease. No belt, no jewelry, shoes easy to slip off and on. She'd watched countless passengers fumble through these procedures over the years. The line behind her probably appreciated her efficiency. Gate B-17 was already crowded when she arrived. Eleanor found a seat near the window, watching ground crew prepare the aircraft. Old instincts kicked in as she observed their movements, the practiced choreography of pre-flight checks. She could still spot a rushed job from 100 yards away, but today everything looked by the book. Flight 2243 to Phoenix now boarding. Starting with our first-class passengers and those needing special assistance, the gate agent announced. Eleanor waited for her group to be called, then joined the shuffling line of passengers making their way down the jetway. The familiar smell of airplane, a mix of fuel, recycled air, and industrial cleaner, brought back memories. Different planes, different missions, same smell. WEF, window seat on the right side, the flight attendant directed with a practiced smile. Eleanor nodded and made her way down the narrow aisle, dodging elbows and bags. 12F put her just behind the wing, her favorite spot. You could see the flaps and control surfaces working during takeoff and landing. Some habits never changed. A young man with headphones already occupied the aisle seat. He barely looked up as Eleanor gestured that she needed to get by. With minimal shuffling, she settled into her window seat, stowed her small bag underneath, and fastened her seatbelt. The middle seat remained empty as boarding continued, a small blessing on a full flight. Eleanor pulled out her book, but found herself watching the ground crew instead. One of them looked barely old enough to drive, reminding her of the fresh-faced recruits she'd treated over the years. "Looks like we got lucky," said the young man beside her, finally removing his headphones as the boarding door closed. No one had claimed the middle seat. "Indeed," Eleanor replied with a polite smile. "I'm Rick," he offered. "Heading to Phoenix for business, Eleanor. Going to see my granddaughter graduate." "That's nice," Rick said, already half returning to his phone. Eleanor didn't mind. She wasn't one for airplane chatter anyway. The safety demonstration began and she watched attentively. Another old habit she couldn't shake. After years of drilling emergency procedures into young pilots, ignoring safety instructions felt wrong, even if she could recite them in her sleep. The aircraft pushed back from the gate right on schedule. Eleanor felt the familiar rumble as the engine spooled up. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the vibrations through the floor. The sensations were so familiar, like putting on an old comfortable coat. "Not a fan of takeoff?" Rick asked, noticing her closed eyes. Eleanor smiled. "Actually, it's my favorite part." The plane taxied to the runway, waited for clearance, and then began its takeoff roll. Eleanor watched as the ground sped by faster and faster until the nose lifted, and the familiar pressure pushed her back into her seat. The ground fell away, buildings shrinking to miniature size as they climbed. The aircraft banked slightly, offering Eleanor a view of the city below. It never got old seeing the world from above. How many flights had she been on in her life? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Yet she still felt that small thrill as they broke through the cloud layer into bright sunshine. Once they reached cruising altitude, Eleanor opened her book, a biography of a World War II flight nurse she'd been meaning to read for years. But her mind kept wandering to Lily. Her granddaughter had chosen medical school, following somewhat in Eleanor's footsteps, though civilian medicine instead of military. Eleanor couldn't be prouder. About an hour into the flight, the first hint of trouble came. A slight shudder ran through the aircraft. Most passengers probably didn't notice, but Eleanor did. Her eyes moved to the wing, watching for any unusual movement. Nothing obvious. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're experiencing some light turbulence. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign, so please return to your seats and make sure your seatbelts are fastened." Eleanor marked her place in her book and closed it. Rick, who had been dozing, woke up at the announcement and reattached his seatbelt. "Happens all the time," he said with a shrug. "Yes, it does," Eleanor agreed, though something in the captain's tone had caught her attention. 20 years of listening to pilots' voices had taught her to hear the subtle notes of concern behind professional calm. The turbulence increased. Drinks jiggled in cups, overhead bins creaked, and a baby started crying somewhere up front. Eleanor kept her eyes on the wing. There, a slight flutter in one of the control surfaces that didn't match the others. The plane dropped suddenly, causing several passengers to gasp. Eleanor's stomach lurched, but her face remained calm. She'd experienced far worse. "Ladies and gentlemen," the flight attendant's voice was steady but tight. "Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Make sure all loose items are secured." The turbulence worsened. The plane shook hard enough that a few items fell from overhead compartments. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, checking on passengers and securing bins. Eleanor noticed her stopping to speak quietly with another crew member. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but their body language spoke volumes. Something beyond ordinary turbulence was happening. The captain's voice returned, sounding deliberately measured. "Folks, we're experiencing some mechanical difficulties that we need to address. As a precaution, we're going to be diverting to Nellis Air Force Base, which is about 20 minutes from our current position. There's no need for alarm, but please follow all crew instructions." A nervous murmur spread through the cabin. Air Force Base, not civilian airport. Eleanor knew what that meant. They needed to get down quickly, and Nellis had the longest runways and best emergency response teams in the area. Rick turned to her, concern evident on his face. "Is that normal? Landing at a military base?" "It's not common," Eleanor said calmly. "But it's a good decision if there's a mechanical issue. Military bases have excellent facilities." What she didn't say was that commercial flights diverted to military installations only when time was critical or the situation potentially serious. Her eyes returned to the wing, where the flutter had become more pronounced. The plane began its descent, more steeply than a standard approach. Eleanor felt the shift in engine pitch and the extension of flaps and slats. The aircraft was heavy and responding sluggishly to controls. She could tell by the slight lag in corrections. Around her, passengers gripped armrests. Some prayed quietly. Others stared straight ahead. A young mother across the aisle clutched her infant tightly, whispering reassurances. Eleanor caught her eye and gave her a gentle, confident nod. The woman seemed to relax slightly. "We're beginning our final approach to Nellis Air Force Base," the captain announced. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Eleanor felt oddly calm as the ground approached. There was a certain comfort in crisis, clarity of purpose, the stripping away of everything unimportant. It reminded her of field operations during her service years. The plane descended through clouds, revealing the distinctive layout of a military airfield below. Eleanor could see emergency vehicles already positioned along the runway. Standard procedure, but it confirmed her suspicions about the seriousness of their situation. As they made their final approach, the aircraft shuddered again, more violently this time. Eleanor's experienced eye caught the uneven deployment of the flaps, a hydraulic issue most likely. Critical for landing, but manageable if the pilots were skilled. And they were. Despite the difficulty, the touchdown was remarkably smooth, professional flying under pressure. The relief in the cabin was palpable as the wheels made contact with the runway. There was even scattered applause, quickly hushed as the pilots applied heavy braking. As they taxied clear of the runway, Eleanor caught sight of the base personnel approaching. She recognized the purposeful efficiency of their movements. The readiness team standing by. For the first time in years, she felt a tug of nostalgia for the world she'd left behind. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom as the plane sat motionless on the Nellis Air Force Base runway. Ladies and gentlemen, I need your continued patience. We're coordinating with base personnel who will be boarding shortly. Please remain in your seats. Through her window, Eleanor watched uniformed figures approach. 2 fire trucks stood at a safe distance, their crews on standby. Standard procedure, but it confirmed what she already suspected. Whatever had forced their landing was serious. A flight attendant hurried past, her professional smile strained. Eleanor caught her eye. "Hydraulic issue with the flaps?" she asked quietly. The flight attendant paused, surprised. "How did you—" "Just a guess," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The young woman hesitated, then shook her head. "Just keeping everyone calm helps us enormously." As the flight attendant moved on, Rick looked at Eleanor curiously. "Hydraulic issue? You some kind of airplane expert?" "I flew a lot in my previous career," she said simply. Around them, anxiety was building. A man 3 rows ahead was becoming loud, demanding answers. A teenage girl across the aisle looked on the verge of tears, clutching her phone. Several passengers were filming through windows, narrating their unexpected adventure. Eleanor unbuckled her seatbelt. "Excuse me," she said to Rick, who moved his legs aside to let her into the aisle. She made her way to the teenage girl first. "First time something like this has happened to you?" Eleanor asked gently, kneeling beside her seat. The girl nodded, eyes wide. "Are we going to be okay?" "We already are," Eleanor said, her voice calm and sure. "We're down safely. That was the important part. Everything else is just inconvenience. But my connecting flight will be taken care of. The airline has procedures for this." Eleanor glanced at the girl's phone. "Save your battery. You'll want it later to let people know you're all right." The girl nodded, putting her phone away. Eleanor moved on to an elderly couple looking disoriented. She explained the situation simply, assuring them that military bases were well equipped to handle civilian passengers. The shouting man was still causing a scene. "This is unacceptable. We deserve to know what's happening." Eleanor approached him next. "Sir," she said in a voice that was quiet but carried natural authority, "the crew is busy ensuring our safety. Raising your voice makes their job harder." The man turned to her, ready to argue, but something in Eleanor's steady gaze made him reconsider. "Fine," he muttered, slumping back in his seat. "But they better have a plan for getting us out of here." "They will," Eleanor assured him. "Military efficiency is something you can count on." By the time she returned to her seat, a ripple of expectation moved through the cabin as the main door opened. 2 Air Force officers stepped aboard, speaking briefly with the flight crew. The lead flight attendant then addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be deplaning shortly. Due to security protocols, you'll be escorted to a waiting area on base while maintenance personnel inspect our aircraft. Please bring all personal belongings with you." The deplaning process was orderly but slow. As passengers gathered their things, Eleanor heard fragments of conversation from the cockpit where the door stood ajar. Technical terms about hydraulic pressure loss and control surface malfunction, confirming what she'd suspected from watching the wing during their approach. When Eleanor's row was finally called, she followed Rick into the aisle. The teenage girl she'd comforted earlier caught her eye and gave a small smile of thanks. The shouting man was now quietly compliant, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. Outside, the desert heat hit like a physical force after the air-conditioned cabin. The brightness was dazzling, the air shimmering above the tarmac. Military personnel directed passengers toward a convoy of base transport vehicles waiting nearby. Eleanor paused at the foot of the stairs, looking back at the aircraft. From this angle, she could see what she couldn't from her window seat, a visible leak near one of the hydraulic lines serving the left wing. But there was something else, something about the pattern of fluid dispersion that triggered an old memory. "Ma'am?" A young airman gestured toward the waiting vehicles. "This way, please." Eleanor nodded and joined the other passengers, but her mind was still on what she'd seen. The base transport, little more than covered golf carts with multiple seats, ferried them across the tarmac toward a low building marked Visitor Processing. Inside, the air conditioning was a relief. The large room had clearly been hastily prepared. Rows of plastic chairs, tables with water bottles and basic snacks, a desk where airline representatives were setting up laptops. The lead flight attendant raised her voice to be heard. "Your patience is appreciated. We're arranging transportation to get you to your destinations. Maintenance crews are assessing our aircraft now. Please help yourselves to refreshments while we process your information. Passengers formed lines at the airline desk. Others claimed chairs already on phones explaining their situation to family members. Eleanor found a seat near the back wall, watching the organized chaos with professional appreciation. The base was handling the unexpected arrival of 170 civilians with remarkable efficiency. A young Air Force lieutenant entered, speaking urgently to a senior airline representative. Eleanor observed their body language. Something wasn't going according to plan. The airline representative soon addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that repairs to our aircraft will take longer than initially estimated. We're working to arrange alternative transportation, but given our location, this may take several hours. A collective groan filled the room. The shouting man from the plane started up again. This is completely unacceptable. I have a meeting this afternoon. Eleanor tuned out the complaints, watching as 3 maintenance personnel entered, conferring with the Air Force officers. Their expressions were serious as they reviewed something on a tablet. Her curiosity piqued. Eleanor approached the water table positioned near their impromptu meeting. As she filled a cup, she overheard fragments of their conversation. Never seen a leak pattern like this. Could have been catastrophic if... Lucky they diverted when they did. Eleanor lingered, arranging packaged cookies on a napkin while listening. The maintenance chief was describing the hydraulic failure, but something in his assessment didn't align with what she'd seen on the tarmac. She'd spent years around aircraft maintenance, had written protocols for emergency landings after hydraulic failures. The pattern he was describing would indicate a simple line rupture, but what she'd seen suggested something potentially more serious. A cascading failure that could affect multiple systems. Eleanor debated with herself. It wasn't her place to interfere. She was retired, a civilian, just another passenger in seat 12F. The maintenance team moved toward the exit, still discussing repair options. Eleanor made her decision and stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the maintenance chief. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you sure it's just a standard line rupture?" The man turned, surprised. He was mid-40s with the confident bearing of someone who knew his job well. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a technical matter." "I understand," Eleanor said calmly. "But the dispersion pattern of hydraulic fluid beneath the left wing suggests directional pressure inconsistent with a simple rupture. It indicates a possible check valve failure in the secondary system." The maintenance team stared at her. The chief's expression moved from dismissive to confused. "How would you know that?" he asked carefully. Eleanor hadn't planned to reveal her background, but the potential safety issue overrode her preference for anonymity. "I was a flight surgeon with the Air Force for 30 years. I wrote part of the maintenance protocol for the C-17 hydraulic systems, which shared design elements with this aircraft." The younger technician looked skeptical. "Flight surgeons are doctors, not engineers." "True," Eleanor acknowledged. "But when you investigate enough hydraulic failures that led to injuries, you learn the patterns." "May I?" She gestured to their tablet. After a moment's hesitation, the chief handed it over. Eleanor quickly navigated through the maintenance diagrams, finding what she was looking for. "Here," she pointed to a junction in the hydraulic system. "The leak pattern suggests pressure was maintained longer than it should have been after initial failure. That only happens if this check valve is compromised. If that's the case, your repair timeline is optimistic, and you'll need to check the entire secondary system before clearance." The maintenance chief took back the tablet, studying the diagram with new eyes. "We should verify this," he said to his team, then turned to Eleanor. "Thank you, ma'am. May I ask your name?" "Dr. Eleanor Reeves," she said simply. The youngest technician's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, Dr. Reeves, who wrote the paper on cascading hydraulic failures after the Kandahar incident?" Eleanor nodded, surprised to be recognized. That paper had been published in a specialized military journal nearly 15 years ago. "I studied your case analysis during my training," he said, excitement overcoming his earlier skepticism. "Your recommendations saved lives." The desert sun beat down as Eleanor followed the maintenance team across the tarmac. Heat waves rippled off the runway, distorting the view of distant hangars. Despite the blazing temperature, she felt energized. This world of aircraft and uniformed personnel, It still felt like home. The leak was first noticed here. The maintenance chief, who had introduced himself as Chief Warrant Officer Peterson, pointed to the underside of the left wing. Eleanor crouched down, ignoring the protest from her knees. The pattern of hydraulic fluid on the concrete told a story that few people could read. But she could. See how it pools asymmetrically? She traced the air above the stain without touching it, and these droplets form a secondary pattern here. Standard ruptures create a more uniform dispersion. The young technician who had recognized her name, Airman First Class Chen, nodded eagerly. Just like in your Kandahar paper. The pressure variance indicates a check valve failure. Exactly, Eleanor said, pleased with his quick understanding. And if that valve failed, what else should we check? The entire secondary and tertiary backup systems, Chen replied immediately. Because a fault in the manufacturing could mean multiple valves from the same batch might be compromised. Peterson looked between them, then up at the aircraft with new concern. That would triple our repair time. Better that than an in-flight failure of the backup systems, Eleanor said quietly. Peterson nodded grimly. We'll need to do a complete hydraulic system inspection. I'll inform the airline representatives. He turned to Eleanor. Dr. Reeves, would you mind taking a look at our initial diagnostic readings? Your insight would be valuable. Eleanor checked her watch. The passengers would be waiting for updates, but this was a safety issue. Of course. They led her to a mobile maintenance unit parked nearby. Inside, screens displayed diagnostic data downloaded from the aircraft's systems. Eleanor slipped reading glasses from her pocket and studied the numbers. There, she pointed to a sequence of pressure readings. 10 minutes before the emergency was declared, there was a momentary pressure spike in the primary system. It recovered, but that's your first warning sign. Chen leaned in. The pilots might not have even noticed. They wouldn't have, Eleanor agreed. The spike was within operational parameters, but it's the pattern that matters. Look at the subsequent readings. Gradually declining pressure in the secondary system even before the primary failed. Peterson was already typing notes. This changes our approach entirely. Dr. Reeves, I need to report this up the chain and to the airline. Would you be willing to stay and consult? Your expertise is, well, it's frankly invaluable here. Eleanor hesitated. Her original plans were already delayed, but a safety issue took precedence. I'll help however I can. As they exited the mobile unit, a group of officers was approaching. At their head was a tall woman with colonel's eagles on her shoulders. Chief Peterson, the colonel called. I understand we have a situation with the civilian aircraft. Yes, ma'am. Peterson straightened. Colonel Walsh, this is Dr. Eleanor Reeves. She's one of the passengers and has identified a potentially serious issue with the hydraulic system. The colonel turned to Eleanor with mild curiosity. Is that so? And you have expertise in aircraft systems, Dr. Reeves? Before Eleanor could answer, Chen spoke up. Ma'am, this is Dr. Eleanor Reeves, former Colonel, Air Force Medical Service. She literally wrote the book on hydraulic failures after Kandahar. Colonel Walsh's expression changed instantly. Dr. Reeves, we weren't informed you were aboard. She extended her hand. It's an honor, ma'am. Your work on the C-17 incident response protocols is still taught at the academy. Eleanor shook her hand, slightly embarrassed by the recognition. I'm just a passenger who noticed something concerning, Colonel. A passenger with exactly the expertise we need, Walsh replied. I've just come from speaking with the airline representatives. They're arranging ground transportation for the other passengers to Phoenix, but it will be several hours before that's in place. She glanced at the aircraft. If what you found is accurate, this aircraft won't be flying anytime soon. I believe that's correct, Eleanor confirmed. Colonel Walsh nodded decisively. Then I'd like to formally request your assistance, Dr. Reeves. We'll ensure you reach your destination, of course. Of course she'll help, came a voice from behind them. Eleanor turned to see Rick approaching, trailed by an anxious-looking airman. Sorry, ma'am. The airman addressed Colonel Walsh. He insisted on coming when he heard where Dr. Reeves was. Rick looked between the uniformed personnel, then at Eleanor. So not just flew a lot in your previous career, huh? They're treating you like you're some kind of big shot out here. Eleanor smiled slightly. I may have understated my background. Colonel Walsh raised an eyebrow. Understated? Dr. Reeves was one of our foremost experts on aviation medicine and safety protocols. Her work revolutionized how we approach hydraulic system failures. She turned to Rick. And you are? Just another passenger. Rick said, suddenly looking less confident. Seat 12E, we've been wondering what's happening with our flight. Your airline is arranging buses to Phoenix, Colonel Walsh informed him. They should be here within 2 hours. In the meantime, we've improved the waiting accommodations, air conditioning, refreshments, Wi-Fi access. Rick nodded, then looked at Eleanor. You coming back with us, Doc? Or are you too important now? There was no malice in his tone, just genuine curiosity. Eleanor appreciated his directness. I need to help with this inspection, she said. But I'll be along shortly. Would you mind telling the others there's progress being made? After Rick had been escorted back to the passenger area, Colonel Walsh turned to Eleanor. Now, Dr. Reeves, while we're addressing the civilian aircraft issue, there's something else you should know. We have an F-22 demonstration scheduled today as part of a training exercise, if you're going to be on base for a few hours anyway. Eleanor couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. I wouldn't mind observing, Colonel. I thought not. Walsh nodded approvingly. First, let's get this hydraulic issue documented. Then perhaps you'd like a closer look at what the newest generation of aircraft can do. For the next hour, Eleanor worked with the maintenance team, examining the hydraulic systems and documenting the evidence of cascading failure. Her fingers moved nimbly through the diagnostic system, muscle memory taking over despite the years away from regular service. She found herself slipping into the familiar cadence of military procedure, using terminology and shorthand she hadn't used in years. Word spread quickly around the base about the distinguished visitor who had arrived unexpectedly on a civilian aircraft. Junior officers and enlisted personnel found reasons to pass by the maintenance area, stealing glances at the silver-haired woman confidently directing mechanics through complex diagnostic procedures. You've got quite the audience, Peterson noted as they finished documenting the findings. Eleanor looked up, noticing for the first time the increased activity around them. They're just curious about the civilian emergency landing. No, ma'am, Chen said with a grin. They're curious about you. Your reputation precedes you. Eleanor was saved from responding by the approach of a young lieutenant who saluted crisply. Dr. Reeves, Colonel Walsh asked me to escort you to the officers' mess for lunch if you finished here. Peterson closed the diagnostic tablet. We've got everything we need thanks to you. This will save us hours of troubleshooting. As Eleanor followed the lieutenant across the base, she noticed how personnel they passed straightened slightly, offering respectful nods. It had been years since she'd experienced this kind of recognition. The officers' mess was cool and relatively quiet. Colonel Walsh was waiting at a corner table with another officer, a brigadier general whose name tag read Harrison. Dr. Reeves, Walsh stood as Eleanor approached. Allow me to introduce Brigadier General Harrison, base commander. The general stood and extended his hand. Dr. Reeves, what an unexpected pleasure. When I heard you were on base, I had to meet you personally. Your work on aviation medicine was required reading when I was coming up through the ranks. Eleanor shook his hand. You're very kind, General. I'm surprised anyone remembers those old papers. Old papers that saved lives. Harrison gestured for her to sit, including mine potentially. I was flying C-17s when your new inspection protocols were implemented. They found a critical flaw in my aircraft that would have gone unnoticed under the old system. Lunch was served, simple but good food, and the conversation flowed easily. Eleanor found herself sharing stories from her career, listening to updates on Air Force developments, and feeling reconnected to the world she'd left behind. As coffee was served, General Harrison leaned forward. Dr. Reeves, Colonel Walsh tells me you've expressed interest in observing today's F-22 demonstration. I'd like to offer you something better. VIP access to the flight line. The pilots would be honored to meet you. Eleanor's eyes lit up despite her attempt to remain professional. That's very generous, General. I'd be delighted. Colonel Walsh led Eleanor through a series of hangars and support buildings, pointing out advancements in aviation technology that had developed since Eleanor's retirement. Despite her years away from active service, Eleanor found herself asking detailed questions that impressed even the colonel. You've kept up with the research, Walsh remarked as they exited a maintenance facility. Old habits, Eleanor admitted. I still read the journals. Hard to let go completely. They approached a restricted area where security was noticeably tighter. After checking Eleanor's temporary credentials, the guards waved them through with respectful nods. This is where we house the stars of today's show. Walsh said as they entered a climate-controlled hangar. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight. 4 F-22 Raptors stood in perfect formation, their sleek lines and distinctive profiles unmistakable even to civilian eyes. But to someone like Eleanor, who understood the engineering and medical considerations behind every curve and angle, they were marvels of human ingenuity. Beautiful, aren't they? Walsh said softly, noting Eleanor's expression. Extraordinary, Eleanor agreed. I reviewed the preliminary medical data when they were first deployed, but seeing them up close, Dr. Reeves. A voice called from behind them. They turned to see a group of flight-suited pilots approaching. The lead pilot, a lieutenant colonel with the name Reynolds on his flight suit, stepped forward and saluted sharply. Lieutenant Colonel David Reynolds, ma'am. 3nd Fighter Squadron. When we heard you were on base, we had to come meet you personally. Eleanor returned the salute automatically, muscle memory taking over. At ease, Colonel. I appreciate the welcome, but I'm just a retired doctor who happened to be on the right flight at the wrong time. Reynolds smiled. With all due respect, ma'am, you're being modest. Your protocols on high-altitude stress indicators are still the standard we train with. You probably saved more pilots with your research than anyone else in the past 30 years. The other pilots nodded in agreement. Eleanor felt a flush of pride she hadn't experienced in years. These young men and women, the best of the best, knew her work and valued it. I'm honored, she said simply. But I'd rather hear about these magnificent machines and what you're planning to show us today. Reynolds grinned. Happy to oblige, ma'am. We've got a 15-minute demonstration planned. Formation flying, tactical maneuvers, and some solo aerobatics that'll knock your socks off. He gestured to the nearest F-22. Would you like a closer look before we begin? Eleanor's eyes lit up. Try and stop me. The next 20 minutes were pure joy for Eleanor as the pilots walked her through the aircraft's systems, explaining modifications and improvements with the enthusiasm of people who truly loved their machines. Eleanor asked questions that revealed her deep understanding, earning appreciative nods from the pilots. The G-force compensation systems have come a long way, Reynolds explained as they examined the cockpit. But we still deal with the same fundamental human limitations you wrote about in your papers. The human body remains the weakest link in the chain, Eleanor agreed. Some things never change. As the inspection continued, Eleanor noticed one of the pilots, a captain whose name tag read Hernandez, checking his tablet with increasing concern. Something wrong, Captain? She asked quietly. Hernandez looked up, surprised that she'd noticed. Just some anomalous readings from Raptor 3, ma'am. Probably nothing, but you never ignore anomalous readings, Eleanor finished for him. May I? After a moment's hesitation, he handed over the tablet. Eleanor studied the numbers, her brow furrowing slightly. How long has it been showing these pressure variances? She asked, pointing to a specific reading. Just this morning, Hernandez replied. Maintenance checked it and cleared it for flight. Said it's within acceptable parameters. Eleanor nodded slowly. Technically, yes, but there's a pattern here that's concerning. She scrolled through more data. Have you experienced any unusual control response during high-G maneuvers? Hernandez looked surprised. Yes, ma'am. A slight lag in the stabilizer response during hard banking. Nothing dangerous, but noticeable. And I assume you reported it. Yes, ma'am, twice, but diagnostics keep coming back clear. Eleanor handed back the tablet. I'd recommend another thorough check of the hydraulic pressure regulator and the backup systems before your demonstration. Reynolds, who had overheard the conversation, joined them. You're seeing something our maintenance team missed? Not missed, Eleanor clarified. Just something that might not trigger standard warning protocols. It's similar to what I just found on your civilian airliner, a pattern of minor variances that could indicate a developing problem. Reynolds studied her face, then nodded sharply. Hernandez, pull Raptor 3 from the lineup. Take Dr. Reeves's concerns to maintenance and don't accept any shortcuts. Yes, sir. Hernandez hurried away. Eleanor felt a momentary pang of guilt. I don't mean to disrupt your demonstration, Colonel. Better disrupted than dangerous, Reynolds said firmly. If you're concerned, that's good enough for me. Colonel Walsh, who had been observing the exchange, nodded approvingly. The demonstration will proceed with 3 aircraft instead of 4. Shall we head to the viewing area, Dr. Reeves? The viewing area turned out to be a raised platform with an excellent view of the airfield. Several senior officers were already present, including General Harrison. The general greeted Eleanor warmly and introduced her to the others. Eleanor found herself the center of attention as officers from various departments asked questions about her work and career. Just as they were taking their seats for the demonstration, a commotion arose from the communications area. A young lieutenant rushed over to General Harrison, speaking urgently in his ear. Harrison's expression grew serious. "Dr. Reeves," he said, turning to Eleanor, "there seems to be an issue with the aircraft you flagged. Would you mind joining us?" Eleanor followed Harrison to a small command post where Captain Hernandez and two maintenance officers were gathered around a monitor. "Talk to me," Harrison ordered. "Sir, we did a deep diagnostic based on Dr. Reeves's concerns," one of the maintenance officers explained. "She was right. We found a critical flaw in the hydraulic pressure regulator that wouldn't have shown up in routine checks." He pointed to the screen. "The primary system would have held for basic maneuvers, but under high stress, like the demonstration today, we're looking at potential catastrophic failure." Harrison turned to Eleanor. "How did you spot this?" "The pattern," Eleanor explained. "It's similar to an issue I documented years ago on a different aircraft type. The symptoms are subtle but distinctive if you know what to look for." The second maintenance officer shook his head. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is an entirely different system than anything from your era." "The physics haven't changed," Eleanor replied calmly. "Hydraulic systems still operate on the same principles, and the human body still responds to failure the same way. I've investigated too many crashes not to recognize the warning signs." Hernandez spoke up. "Sir, maintenance has confirmed a hairline crack in the pressure regulator housing. Under high G conditions, it would have failed completely." A silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. Finally, Harrison turned to Eleanor. "It seems we owe you another debt of gratitude, Doctor. This could have been, well, let's just say I'm grateful you were on that civilian flight today." Eleanor shook her head. "I just pointed out something concerning. Your team did the actual work of finding the problem." "Sir," Hernandez said, "the issue isn't limited to Raptor 3. The regulator is from a specific manufacturing batch. All our aircraft need to be inspected immediately." Harrison's decision was immediate. "Cancel the demonstration. Ground all F-22s until they can be thoroughly inspected." As the orders went out, Eleanor found herself swept into an urgent planning meeting. What had started as a simple observation had ballooned into a potential fleet-wide safety issue. For the next hour, Eleanor worked with maintenance teams to develop an enhanced inspection protocol based on her observations. She drew on decades of experience, helping them identify the subtle signs that might indicate similar problems in other aircraft. Word spread quickly through the base about what had happened. The woman from Seat 12F hadn't just helped with a civilian aircraft issue, she'd potentially prevented a military aviation disaster. As the urgent work continued, Eleanor glanced at her watch. The bus taking the other passengers to Phoenix had surely departed by now. Her carefully planned trip to her granddaughter's graduation was becoming more complicated by the minute. As if reading her thoughts, Colonel Walsh approached. "Don't worry about your transportation, Dr. Reeves. General Harrison has authorized a military flight to get you to Phoenix as soon as we're finished here." Eleanor nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I didn't expect my unplanned stop to become quite so involved." Walsh smiled. "Sometimes we end up exactly where we're needed, even when it's not where we planned to be." The sun was beginning its descent toward the Nevada mountains as Eleanor finished reviewing the final inspection protocol. For hours, she had worked alongside maintenance crews, teaching them to spot the subtle warning signs she'd identified. The atmosphere had shifted from urgent crisis management to focused determination. "I think that covers everything," Eleanor said, signing off on the last document. "Your teams are quick learners." Chief Peterson nodded appreciatively. "Having the author of the original research guiding us made all the difference, ma'am." Eleanor smiled tiredly. The day had taken an unexpected turn, and the fatigue was finally catching up to her. "I'm just glad I could help." Colonel Walsh approached, tablet in hand. "Dr. Reeves, General Harrison has arranged your transportation to Phoenix. A C-21 is being prepared now. Should have you there within the hour." "That's incredibly generous," Eleanor said, "but certainly not necessary. A regular flight would be fine." "The General insists," Walsh replied with a smile. "Besides, after what you've done today, it's the least we can offer." Eleanor glanced around the hangar where teams were systematically inspecting each F-22. Already, They had found similar issues in 2 more aircraft, potentially dangerous flaws that might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. "Will you walk with me?" Walsh asked. "There's something we'd like to show you before you leave." Eleanor followed the colonel outside, where the desert air had cooled slightly as evening approached. They walked toward another hangar, this one with its massive doors wide open. As they approached, Eleanor could see a gathering of uniformed personnel inside. "What's this?" she asked. Walsh simply smiled. "You'll see." As they entered the hangar, Eleanor stopped short. The entire F-22 squadron stood in perfect formation, pilots in the front row, maintenance crews behind them, support personnel filling the rest of the space. At least 60 people in all standing at parade rest. General Harrison stepped forward. "Dr. Reeves, before you depart, we wanted to properly thank you for your service today, and throughout your distinguished career." Eleanor started to protest that such formality wasn't necessary, but the general raised a hand. "Squadron, attention!" Harrison called. As one, the assembled personnel snapped to attention. Back straight, eyes forward, a perfect display of military precision. "Today," Harrison continued, "what began as an emergency landing revealed a potentially catastrophic flaw in our aircraft. Without Dr. Reeves's expertise and willingness to speak up, we might have lost pilots and aircraft. Her decades of research and experience quite literally saved lives today, as they have throughout her career." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. After years of retirement, of feeling gradually forgotten and increasingly irrelevant, this acknowledgement touched her deeply. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. "Dr. Reeves, on behalf of the 302nd Fighter Squadron, we'd like to present you with this token of our appreciation." He opened the box to reveal a squadron patch and a small model of an F-22, mounted on a wooden base with a brass plaque. The plaque read, "To Dr. Eleanor Reeves, whose wisdom and vigilance keep eagles soaring. With deepest gratitude, 302nd Fighter Squadron." "We don't give these to just anyone," Reynolds said quietly. "You're part of our squadron now." Eleanor accepted the gift with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you. This means more than you know." Harrison spoke again. "Squadron, present arms." The assembled personnel saluted in perfect unison. Eleanor, following instinct and training from decades past, returned the salute crisply. "Carry on," Harrison ordered, and the formation broke, with pilots and crew coming forward to personally thank Eleanor. Some shared stories of how her research had improved their training. Others simply wanted to shake her hand. A young female pilot approached last. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, you're the reason I believed I could do this job. I read about your work when I was in high school, how you broke barriers in aviation medicine. You paved the way for a lot of us." Eleanor hadn't expected this, hadn't realized her career had inspired others in such a personal way. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. "It means everything to hear." As the informal reception continued, Colonel Walsh checked her watch. "I hate to interrupt, but Dr. Reeves's aircraft is ready." General Harrison nodded. "Of course. Can't have you missing your granddaughter's graduation after all this." The walk to the waiting C-21 felt like a procession, with personnel stopping their work to nod respectfully as Eleanor passed. The small executive jet gleamed in the evening light, its engines already running, stairs deployed and waiting. "This is far too much," Eleanor protested again. "Nonsense," Harrison said. "It was already headed to Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix. Just a small detour to drop you off first." At the foot of the stairs, the general offered his hand. "Dr. Reeves, it has been an honor. If you ever find yourself missing the service, there's always consulting work available for someone with your expertise." Eleanor shook his hand firmly. "I'll keep that in mind, General. And thank you for everything today." Colonel Walsh saluted. "Safe travels, ma'am. And congratulations to your granddaughter." As Eleanor climbed the stairs, she turned back once to see a line of personnel standing at attention beside the aircraft. Just that morning, she had been anonymous, just another passenger in seat 12F. Now, she was being sent off with honors usually reserved for distinguished visitors. The flight to Phoenix was brief but luxurious compared to the commercial airline she'd started her journey on. The Air Force pilot treated her with the deference due a visiting dignitary, and the crew made sure she was comfortable throughout the short journey. As they approached Phoenix, Eleanor gazed out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. She thought about the day's events, how a routine flight had turned into something so unexpected, how knowledge she'd thought was gathering dust had proved vital and relevant. The C-21 touched down smoothly at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. As Eleanor gathered her belongings, the pilot approached. "Ma'am, there's a car waiting to take you to your hotel, courtesy of General Harrison." Eleanor shook her head in amazement. "He didn't have to do that. He insisted, ma'am. Said it's the least we could do for the woman who saved our best birds." The car, a sleek black sedan with a respectful driver, delivered Eleanor to her hotel in downtown Phoenix. As she checked in, the desk clerk handed her a message. "This came for you about an hour ago, Dr. Reeves." The note was from her granddaughter, Lily. "Grandma, heard about your adventure from the airline. Call me when you get in. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you." In her room, Eleanor set the squadron gift on the desk and called her granddaughter. "Grandma!" Lily's voice burst through the phone. "The airline told us your flight had an emergency landing at Nellis. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, dear," Eleanor assured her. "Just had an unexpected detour. They said you helped with some technical problem?" "Dad said that sounded like you. Can't help yourself from jumping in when there's a crisis." Eleanor laughed softly. "I may have offered a little advice." "Well, I'm just glad you're here safe. Tomorrow's the big day. I wouldn't have missed it for the world," Eleanor said warmly. "Get some rest, sweetheart. I'll see you tomorrow." After they hung up, Eleanor unpacked her small bag and got ready for bed. It had been an exhausting day, but a fulfilling one. As she set her alarm for the morning, her eyes fell on the squadron gift. Picking up the small F-22 model, she ran her fingers over its precisely crafted surfaces. The moment in the hangar replayed in her mind, all those young men and women standing at attention, showing respect not just for her rank, but for her knowledge and contribution. In retirement, Eleanor had often felt invisible, her lifetime of expertise seemingly irrelevant in a rapidly changing world. Today had reminded her that knowledge, carefully gained and thoughtfully applied, never truly lost its value. Tomorrow, she would watch Lily graduate, beginning her own professional journey in medicine. Eleanor wondered what unexpected detours her granddaughter's career might take, what lives she might touch in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Eleanor placed the squadron memento carefully on the nightstand, where she could see it from the bed. She had boarded a flight this morning as just another passenger in seat 12F, a retired doctor on her way to a family event. She would attend her granddaughter's graduation tomorrow as Dr. Eleanor Reeves, whose lifetime of dedication and expertise had once again made a difference when it mattered most. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor smiled at the thought of telling Tom about her adventure when she got home. Just a quick trip, she had promised him. Nothing exciting, sometimes, she reflected. The most meaningful moments came when you least expected them. Like finding yourself exactly where you needed to be, even when it wasn't where you had planned to go.